Welcome to the Cedar Falls Committee of the Whole meeting this February 4th, 2019. I'll now call the meeting to order. We have a couple of items on the docket for this evening. The first is the fiscal year 20 budget and bills and payroll. So first up, I'll have Jen Rodenbeck, our Director of Finance and Business Operations, to discuss the budget.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to start by, I know oftentimes council members will say this at the end, but I want to start at the beginning. Obviously, we have other staff people who put a lot of time and effort in on this project, so I just wanted to give a shout out to Lisa Roding and Kathy Niebergall in our office who actually do a lot of the work. Obviously, it takes a lot of work to get from the departments and things we discuss at goal setting, and then to finally get it into a document to get in all of your hands. So just wanted to give them a big thank you. As we go through, I know some of this, maybe a lot of council people know and understand, but some of it I always like to just go through to just remind the public sometimes about, again, what the process is to get here, what are the things, the factors we use to develop the budget, and then kind of put it all together and what does that really mean to them. So again, it is a process. It isn't just tonight and then the formal hearing in 2 weeks. In October and November, departments are submitting their budget requests to finance. They're looking at what do they think they need this year, what do they want this year, and submitting those. In December and January, as you know, we're taking some of those goal setting parameters that council discussed in November at goal setting and figuring out, okay, how is that going to kind of work in the budget in terms of cash reserves, budget limits, CIP, debt, what are some of the priorities we want to do maybe in the budget this year. So we're kind of compiling all that in December and January. We also have to get our TIF certification done in December. So that then shows how much TIF revenue we'll be collecting in the upcoming budget season. In January, we just got the CIP approved, which again, then those projects that were scheduled for FY20, we make sure and get in the budget, the FY20 budget. In January, we also get, right at the beginning of the year, we get the certifications from the county about what our valuations are, and then we can really start working on the revenue piece of the budget. And then I guess that brings us to February, where we're here to just go through tonight some of the highlights, discuss again a lot of the factors, and then in 2 weeks we'll have the formal budget hearing. And I should also mention that we always say FY or fiscal year 20. So what that means is that that will be our fiscal year that starts on July 1st of 19 and goes through June 30th of 2020. And then our last thing is we do have to file it with the county and the state of Iowa. So again, people get their tax bill and there's things that go in to determine what their taxes are. Now, of course, tonight we're only talking about the city's share of someone's tax bill. Obviously, the school and the county has part that goes into the total amount, but we're just talking about the city's portion. So to determine what you're actually going to pay in taxes, you have to look at what's your value of your property, what's the rollback that's set by the state, and then what's the tax rate. And really, for the folks here, your job is really about the tax rate. The valuation set by the county, rollback set by the state. What you have authority then is to set the actual rate. So all three of those factors go into determining what taxes are paid. So first, just want to talk about the valuation piece. And a reminder, this is the part that's set by the county. So assess valuations. That's the 100% of your value. Oftentimes we'll talk about assessed value and taxable value. Again, assessed is the 100%. The taxable is what you're actually taxed on, which we'll get to. So for Cedar Falls, we actually had an increase of $101 million in our assessed valuation. So that was a 3.2% increase in our assessed valuations. What kind of makes up that $101 million is $76 million as of residential properties, 32 for commercial industrial. We actually saw a little decrease in our multi-residential properties to get to our total increase of $101 million. And again, obviously the biggest chunk is residential, as you hear oftentimes, or highly residential. But you know, as we go through, you can see really having growth helps us, right? That, you know, a lot of communities maybe don't always get to see growth, or they're seeing decline. So we're fortunate in Cedar Falls that we continue to see that. The other thing is last year was the first year that Cedar Falls had valuations over $3 billion, so that's kind of an interesting statistic. For those that have been on for a while, you hear every now and again that there may be revaluations by the county. We're in an even year, FY20, so it's not a revaluation year. They usually do that on the odd years. So if you have a $100,000 house, right now it stayed the same. Now, obviously, if you did something to your property, it might have changed it, but there was no revaluation by the county. Sometimes there's been years when they've done across the board 10% increase, but for this year it's the same. Obviously, if you had a $200,000, it stayed $200,000. So no revaluation this year. So that's a little bit about valuations. So the rollback, that's the piece that's set by the state that then takes, here's my assessed value of my property, what am I actually getting taxed on? And there's rollback on residential, commercial, and industrial properties. So residential rollback. We talk about this a lot in Cedar Falls, again, just because we're highly residential. So you can see, you don't necessarily need to be able to read the numbers, but you can kind of see the line on the chart, and it's telling you what residential rollback has been doing recently. So you can see for the last 10 years, it has been increasing. It's been kind of a little bit in the last couple years. It kind of goes up a little bit, down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. So actually, for the fiscal year 20 that we're heading into, the rollback on residential is 56.92%. That's increased from the current year we're in, which is 55.62. So again, this means if I have a $100,000 home, I'm getting taxed on 56% of it. I'm getting taxed on $56,900. And again, I just mentioned about it's kind of been fluctuating up and down. I think it's always nice to maybe go back more than just 10 years to see really what it's doing, and you can see how we're almost back or right at back to where we were 20 years ago. So you can see where it really dipped down and gotten that low of 09 at 44%, and now it's been increasing back up. So it's always kind of interesting to see those trend cycles. And again, obviously greatly impacts Cedar Falls. This is a pie chart, which most of this just shows how our property is broken down in terms of valuation in the city. So the big orange piece is the residential piece. So again, we're right at 75% for Cedar Falls. Most other communities, the statewide average for that is right around like 56%. So we're definitely unusual in terms of that. So again, we're always paying attention then to what that rollback factor is doing. Just kind of moving on then. So that's residential properties. Want to move on now to commercial properties. Obviously, a few years back, there was a lot of discussion about commercial rollback because it was taxed at 100% for quite a few years. And then they rolled it back from down to 95, and then it went down to 90%. And so that's staying the same for FY20. So commercial properties will be taxed at 90% of their assessed value. And again, these rollback factors, whether you're talking about residential, commercial, we'll get to multi-residential, that's really what causes that tax burden shift. So anytime for one class of property the rollback goes up, naturally they're the ones who are going to be paying more taxes. So in this year where residential rollback went up and commercial stayed the same, naturally that just means residential, the shift went on to residential this year. Backfill funding, why we talk about that as it relates to commercial valuations is when it was rolled back to 90%, there was discussion then by the legislature about backfilling to the communities then and schools and counties about the amount that was lost for that. And we oftentimes refer to that as backfill. So for Cedar Falls, that's right, a little under 600,000, 568,000 we're getting in FY19. So again, just a little bit of a history lesson. So in FY17, that was the last year, or 17, the backfill was not guaranteed after that. So 18 and the current year we're in right now were the first years it wasn't guaranteed. So for 18, 19, and now for the 20 budget, we're proposing to continue to not include the backfill revenue in the budget. Again, we're trying to be conservative. We never know what's going to happen in a legislative season, so we will continue to have in our budget not to include the revenue, and then if we do get it, we'll use it for a one-time capital project. And again, that's consistent with what we did for 18 and 19. Multi-residential property. Again, the same time when there was rollback in commercial, there was also now rollback on multi-residential properties, and that's in an 8-year phase-in. So in FY20, the loss in the there was a loss in the multi-residential assessed valuation. I don't know if you remember when I just had that up a little bit ago, that actually went down a little bit. Plus you factor in that the rollback continues to go down for multi-residential, so that will only be at 75% for FY20. Obviously, that's a loss of revenue we're getting, on our multi-residential properties. So again, that will eventually get to the residential rate of, right now it's at 56%. So we're still have a few years left that we're going to be getting to that. So that's about rollback. We already talked about valuation, and so again, now for what you guys are able to do tonight and talk about is the tax rate piece of it. So the current year we're in, our tax rate is $11.22. For FY20, what we're proposing is for our tax rate to go down to $10.95. So it is a decrease of 27 cents. That's about 2.4% decrease in the rate. Now remember, the rollback went up for residential, so we'll get to what the real impact is for residential property. But the rate itself is going down 2.4%. You can see for Cedar Falls, I know oftentimes we like to talk about how do we compare with other cities. So, of course, we don't know what they're all going to do for 20, so the chart's for 19 still. So you can see we have the 5th lowest rate in comparison to 20 other cities our size. Now, keep in mind, you never know for all those cities what all goes in their rate as well. In other words, are they including the backfill revenue or not, and some of those things. So you'll see that what we're reducing our rate to, $10.95, is going to be pretty close to that next one in line. One of the other things, of course, that we talk about frequently is how does our outstanding debt. And again, that has impact on our rate as well. And this just shows what our outstanding debt is to our assessed valuation. And you can see, and I know the numbers are hard to read, but you can see we're the lowest one of 20 cities in Iowa, largest cities in Iowa, using like 6% of our debt capacity. You can see the next one to us, Iowa City, is at 18%. So we're extremely lower in terms of what people are using. You can see that it gets up to, there's some cities using almost 70% of their debt capacity. So again, that's just showing those are the factors we're using in developing the budget as well. Now, I always like to remind people, keep in mind we do have internal debt, that we don't want to forget about that we're paying ourselves back and using that. So you take all of those pieces, and what people really want to know, right, is what's going to happen to my taxes. And so with the rate that we talked about, what will happen is residential will actually see a slight decrease in the rate. So it'll be a little under, about 0.13%, that it'll go down. So commercial and industrial, they'll go down by 2.4%, and for multi-residential, they'll go down by 7%. Now, why this is interesting, and again, that's kind of in that green bar there, is, again, keep in mind that our rate went down 2.4%. So for commercial industrial, that's what their taxes are going to go down because they didn't have any rollback change. They're stayed at 90. Why multi-residential sees a larger decrease at 7% is because they also had their rollback factor go down. So they see a larger decrease. But why residential doesn't see as much is because they had a rollback increase. So I'm not trying to throw all these increases and decreases out, but it does show that shift then, how that works in terms of that rollback factor shifting that. So again, all classes of property will see a decrease based on this rate that's being proposed. So what are some other things? Those are, the valuations, the rate, but what were some other factors we looked at when we were developing the budget? So we want to continue to set aside capital replacement funds in the general fund. Also want to, we continue to not use the full amount of the trust and agency levy. So under the Code of Iowa, we can take all of the salaries that are paid out of the general fund and we can levy the benefit piece outside of that general fund, that $8.10 levy you hear us talk about. But we didn't need to levy that full amount, so we continue not to have to levy that full amount in FY20. We didn't utilize the 27-cent emergency levy that some other communities maybe are using. We are continuing not to use that. Mentioned this already, all the projects in the CIP for the FY20 column were included in the budget, so it's not like we developed the CIP and then developed the budget and determined we had to cut some projects. No, we developed that knowing that's what we plan on doing when it gets to the budget. Continue to pay for a portion of debt service out of the $8.10 levy. Using our EMA levy for emergency management costs and consolidated dispatch. So again, that's consistent with what we've done over the last few years. Salary and benefits. Obviously, that has a big impact on the budget. When you talk about a third of our budget being salaries and benefits, we know that's factors we have to include. So in the budget, we don't have any increase in health insurance contribution from the employees. Some of that is because we are in the middle of union contracts still with our 3 union groups. So there's no increase on health insurance from employees in there. In terms of retirement systems, IPERS will remain the same at 9.44% that the city will be contributing. So there's no change in costs as it relates to IPERS because they changed the percentage. Now, if there is, the one thing we always talk about with IPERS is when there is changes, it is shared between the employee and employer, which is we always see as a benefit. That's if they're going to do that, then both are sharing in that cost. In terms of the other pension system that relates to our police and fire, the 411 pension system, the percentage on theirs did decrease for 20. So it's going to go from 26% down to about 24.4 for 20. But we will still have to levy, obviously, dollars to pay for those costs. So for FY20, we'll be at $1.5 million that we're levying to cover those 411 pension costs. Salary in accordance with union agreement. Again, we are entering the 3rd year of our union contracts, and in the contract it does talk about settlement of the CPI plus 0.75%, but it'll be no less than 2 and no greater than 3. So we knew going into this, we already knew what our range will be for salaries. Also in here is the continuation of the PSO model. Other staffing things. Departments were directed to review their current staffing levels and determine if additional staffing is necessary. Now keep in mind, these are things that are budgeted. So just because they're budgeted doesn't mean we're just automatically moving ahead with them. Obviously, departments will still come back, justify, why they need the position and that. But these are the ones that we'll have in the FY20 budget. So under administration, we are adding a full-time communication specialist that will be included under the administration budget. We're also adding a full-time economic development position. Now that's not really an add for 20 because we already had it budgeted in our planning for FY19. It's just moving it really from planning to administration. Under finance and business operation, we do have in the budget 2 additional part-time parking enforcement attendants. You've heard some of this as related to the parking study, that one of the recommendations, and that's coming here in 2 weeks, but the formal report, but you heard if you were at the public meeting, that one of the recommendations is that we maybe need to expand our enforcement hours to include evening and weekends. So again, doing this doesn't mean we're just going to go automatically out there and hire the 2, but we did want to at least budget for that, so we had it in the budget if we did decide we're going to implement that recommendation. There's also a part-time position at the community center to help supervise that facility. Under community development, there's additional part-time building inspector to help seasonally during the busy summer season. In municipal operation and program, there's additional full-time visitors and tourism coordinator position that we've added to the V&T budget. There's also in there to move the part-time fitness instructor to full-time. So again, these are things not necessarily just right away moving ahead with, but they're in the budget so we can continue to talk about them. Under public safety, we'll have 2 additional public safety officers that we're hiring ahead. So you may recall a year ago, I was standing here really talking about the same issue. that it takes so long to get them trained on the street, when they go through their police training. And so we decided to budget 5 positions ahead in FY19, and we're doing the same for 20. We're budgeting 2 additional ones. So again, that just puts us in a better position. So when people do leave, we've already got other people trained and ready to go because we're hiring ahead. So that's really our staffing that we're adding to the budget. Other things that I know sometimes are of interest in the past that people have been interested is outside agency funding. So I've just summarized those here. That block grant, we do have 6 agencies that we'll include in the FY20 budget for a total of $29,670. The visitors and tourism went through their application process again for the community betterment grants, and so in the budget is 6 agencies funded for the total of $28,700. Economic development grants, we have 3 agencies in there for $43,000 plus dollars in there for facade improvements. People may recall those are things we used to do with block grant funding that now we're doing through our economic development grants. And B&T and economic development grants, by the way, are funded by hotel motel tax revenue. Health Trust, may recall that the Health Trust, we have our investments in reserve and the interest off of those. We determine each year, we hold back for inflation to add to the principal, and then if there's additional interest out there, the Health Trust reviews applications, and part of the budget is their recommendation to fund 8 agencies for $188,000. The municipal band requested $35,000 to be funded, and just a reminder to people how that works with the band is there's actually a band levy that we're levying for them, and we collect it, and then we turn around and give that to municipal band. I think we're one of 3 cities in Iowa that have the band levy. So this is an increase of $5,000. They actually have requested $30,000 for several years, and so this is one of the first times they've asked for an increase. Other outside agencies, Met, our transit system, did ask for a 2.5% increase to their base request, so that's $385,000. That's budgeted for 20. However, they're also asking for an additional little under $33,000 to expand Route 9. There's been a lot of discussion about Route 9 in the past, and we had years where we reduced some of that funding. Some of you may recall that Route 9 does not run all day. I won't get it exactly right, but I think it goes from, like, I want to say 7 in the morning till 10, and then it doesn't start up again till 1 p.m. So there's 3 hours every day in the middle of the day that it doesn't run. And so what Met has done in their request is they've asked us to now fund those 3 hours. Now, again, this is in the budget. Obviously, we want to get more information from Met. We want to have them come, meet, talk more about what options there are, but we thought it was safer to, again, put it in the budget and then see where we're at. And then I'm sure Met will probably come back here then what kind of came out of that and what the continued recommendation is for that funding for Route 9. Yeah.
And that's the route south of town?
Right. And Met in the requests, of course, talked about, obviously, things really expanding down in the south. They're finding that people are requesting that additional service. They feel like there's enough ridership there that they want to expand that. So, again, it's just in the budget for tonight, but we'll be finding more out from them and what other options there are. I think David Sturch also mentioned to me, he's the rep on the board, that I think they're looking at all their routes too, just to see what else can be reconfigured. So again, I guess that's updates to come on that. So in saying all that, all those factors, outside agency funding, so just a little bit about this, just to summarize things then. So FY20 is a balanced budget. There'll be a decrease, 0.13% on residential properties, a 2.41% decrease on commercial and industrial, and 7.05% decrease for multi-residential properties. I think as always, when we're here talking about the FY20 budget, we're not just talking about this year, we're looking down the road. You know, same thing when we're doing the CIP. We're trying to, you know, look ahead and just try to keep things level. And so there isn't big decreases, big increases. And so we feel like setting this and the rate we're doing, we still have a sound base looking forward. Obviously, growth really helped us this year in being able to lower the tax rate. This would have been a different discussion if we wouldn't have had 3% growth in our assessed valuation. This would have been a different discussion if the residential rollback would have dropped dramatically. So all those things, again, making sure we're kind of in a good position if some of those things happen in another year. However, one of the things we always want to do, and you've seen this chart before, is always want to look at what's our growth in expenditures compared to our growth in revenue. And we want to make sure that, you know, we don't want revenue in the downward line, and we don't want expenditures going up. We want to make sure that if our expenditures are going up, we have the revenue to offset that. And you can see that's why the lines kind of follow each other. And that's also showing that's why we're giving you a balanced budget, that we're not increasing expenses more than what we have in growth or revenue. So looking forward, again, I always want to be looking forward and not to this year. Multi-residential rollback, we know, is going to continue to decline. It's in that phase-in of 8 years, but so it'll eventually get to that about the same as residential, 56%. We know that's a loss of revenue to the general fund. We know backfill is not guaranteed for 20, so we'll be listening closely to this legislative season to see what they're going to talk about as it relates to backfill. Continue to watch the residential rollback factor just because it is a big impact on Cedar Falls. Sewer and stormwater rates we're going to have to continue to monitor. You may recall that this last year we did do increases on those, and you heard me talk about in the CIP. There's so many projects that we have for both of those. We got to continue to watch, are rates enough, you know, and be ready to look at those again in a few years after the increases are that we already set. This year we'll be looking at then now doing a rate study on refuse. It's probably time again. It's been 5 years, so we probably need to look at that. So Brian's probably cringing over there because he knows that Lisa and I will be bothering him then about just looking at our costs for refuse, what's our rates, are we covering everything, how's the rates broken down in terms of regular routes, yard waste, you know, all of those things that we'll be looking at. So that's something we'll plan on doing in our upcoming fiscal year. The other thing that I know, this is probably will be a question that Council Person DeBoer might ask, but you know, I think she always wants to know again about worried that sometimes if it's too low, and do we have what we have for tools moving forward? And I think for all of you, I think you always have that concern again, because you don't want to have a major decrease this year and now we're coming back next year and have a huge increase next year. So what do we still have for kind of tools, or what do we have if we do have a severe decrease in the residential rollback? What happens if a year we have decrease in valuations? I mean, we tend to not think about that much at Cedar Falls because things have been going so well that we don't think about that, but those things that, you know, what do we still have that we can always use if need be? I mentioned that we don't levy the maximum for our trust and agency, so if we really had to, that's $1.9 million we could levy outside of our general fund that we're not doing now. So we have that tool. Now granted, if we have to do that, that is a tax increase, but at least we have that tool. We have that ability. It's not like we're maxed out at all of our rates and we have nothing we can do. We still have that ability. We have positions budgeted in 20 that future retirements will offset. So we talked about we're actually hiring ahead as it relates to a public safety. So those are things that eventually we would not have those in. Again, we're saving up capital replacement funds, so if we need to for capital projects, major capital projects, we have those funds sitting there. Continue to save the TIF release for future economic development. So again, a year ago was talking about this, and the year before that, and then this year is really that year that we saw, in some ways, why we needed that, in terms of we were able, in land acquisition, that we had funds that we can use to cash flow then, and then eventually TIF revenue can offset. But this is a perfect example that we had an opportunity for land acquisition and we were able to have cash to buy that. We don't have to go issue debt to do that. So Again, it kind of shows why we feel like that's a continuing good priority and policy here, is to continue to reserve that release we had a few years ago when we had some of our TIF expire. We do still pay for some debt service out of the general fund. Again, I mentioned we don't use the 27-cent emergency levy. So if any year we had to, that's $527,000 that we could have had additional revenue for this year. Now remember, 27 cents would have got added to our tax rate, but it is money that we could have if we needed. And again, CFU is, continues to be a partner with the city, a financial partnership with the city. So I'm going to recap and then have questions, Mayor. Is that okay? Okay. So again, working budget shows the decrease of 0.13% on residential, 2.41 decrease, 0.41 decrease on commercial industrial. Property tax rate will decrease from 11.22 to 10.95. What our schedule is looking like, so tonight we'll be setting the public hearing on the council agenda to have in 2 weeks the hearing. We have to publish that to meet our publication deadlines. So I have to publish that in a couple days. February 18th, we'll actually hold the public hearing on the budget, and then we'll have to get it all certified to the county before March 15th. So really tonight, what I will be asking for then is a motion to actually approve the maximum rate at $10.95. Now keep in mind that we can set that, publish it, but at the hearing, you can always decrease it. We just can't increase it once it's published, or we'd have to start over. So again, you'll see that our total budget then is just a little under 82 million, and we'll be levying taxes for a little under 22 million. So questions, and then we can come back to the motion, Mayor? Or?
Certainly, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Certainly open it up, Mr. Miller.
Jen, you mentioned twice, I believe, that we cover a portion of debt service out of the 810 levy. What's the significance of that,
So,
or the alternative, I guess?
Sure. So we have an actual debt service levy that we levy most of our debt service out of. But we are able to levy some out of the $8.10. And the significance of that is, again, if there's a year we really needed that capacity in the $8.10 levy, we could move that over to the debt service levy. It also, what it helps for us is you technically can't certify debt until you sell the bonds and certify it with the county. So what we do in our general fund is budget for what we're planning on an anticipated bond sale in 20 and the payment in 20, that then we can pay for that out of our general fund. I might have just muddied the waters for you there, Mark, but does that make sense? Yep. So again, it's kind of our way of how we're trying to be conservative. We don't want to happen is 20 comes along, we sell some bonds, and now all of a sudden we have a debt service payment in 20 that we weren't able to budget for because we hadn't certified it yet. So by having it in the general fund, it gives us that flexibility to be able to do that, and then the next year we can put it in our debt service levy.
Perfect.
Good.
Anything further for Jennifer? Well, as always, great job explaining the potential complication in simple ways. I appreciate that myself.
So the motion, I'll put it back up there.
Of course, that's fine. Is there a motion to approve the maximum rate as presented?
So moved. Second.
Motion, second. Any further discussion from council? I'd open up for the public since we're starting policy here, but no one is here. So I'll ask for all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 2, is there a motion to approve bills and payroll?
So moved.
Second.
Motion, second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. That concludes this evening's Committee of the Whole. We'll wait to the top of the hour for the regular City Council meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.